Hello everyone, it's Dr. Tina again with Pro Parent Series, and today we have someone truly inspirational. She is someone who created a job she loves, she has a work she adores, and all this around her family. Let me welcome Lynsay Gould. Hi Lynsay, how are you?
Thank you so much for that lovely intro, Tina. I'm fabulous. Thank you for having me.
It's so nice and such a pleasure and such an honor having you. So just for a start, I always ask all of our experts to say something about themselves and their story, how they got into the work they're doing now. So let's begin.
Okay, so I'm Lynsay. Lynsay Gould. I am a business and podcasting coach, and I help people to start and grow profitable podcasts that really help them grow their businesses. And how did I get into that? So back in 2015, when I quit my job, my background is in corporate human resources, HR. And I finally got the courage to leave my job in 2015. And one of the biggest reasons that I was able to do that was because I listened to podcasts. Mm-hmm. Now, I know there'll be people who are watching this video or listening to this audio who will resonate with that because we've all had periods in our time, in our working careers where we're so busy, we're so crazy busy, and we don't know anybody in real life who is doing what we want to do. So listening to people on podcasts was an amazing way for me to sort of be introduced to this whole new world that I didn't really know existed. Now, I'd been a coach and a mentor for 20 years, but I only found out really about the online world of coaching and mentoring and business in 2015. So when I quit my job and I started my business, one of the first things I wanted to do as soon as I was able was start a podcast because I know how transformational they can be. And the great thing about them, those of you who are listening, it's amazing to have a podcast that works around your family because you can literally do it in your PJs with your hair up on the top of your head, no makeup, probably with a little baby drool coming down your shoulder. It doesn't matter. You're not on video. So yeah, I love podcasting, and the people that I've helped to start podcasts are really, they're changing the world. And that's not a cliche, and it's not a cheesy thing to say, that they're changing the world. They're getting their message out and being heard by a whole new audience of people. So that's why I love it. That's why I got into it. It's almost like a payback. I wanted to pay back, the fact that I was helped by podcasts to start my own business, and I want to do the same for others.
Oh, so it's such a nice story. So for all the people who would love, and I know there are a lot of parents who are listening to this series and they have a voice, they have a message, they would love to start to escape this classical 9-to-5. And podcast, as you say, is the way. What do we need to start? Like if we don't have any idea of what do we need, if I would want to start a podcast maybe tomorrow, is that possible?
You could, but it wouldn't be amazing. It needs a bit of preparation. It needs some time to make sure that you're setting up the show that your ideal listeners want to listen to, so that you can convert those listeners into paying clients. So it takes a bit of preparation. There are lots of ways that you can, work with me or work with other people to get you started with your podcast. But in terms of equipment, the biggest question I get asked all the time is, what equipment do I need to start my podcast? At the most foundational level, all you need is your voice and a laptop. That is all you need. But what would be better is if you have a microphone. You can probably see one I've got up there. That one's called the Blue Yeti. It's a fantastic starter microphone. The one I'm using here on this big fancy arm is called a Rode Podcaster, and I really recommend this one. It's a fabulous microphone. But you can get started literally with the earphones that you're wearing now, Tina. There's a little microphone on them. You can start with that. Don't let technology and a lack of equipment stop you from getting started. If you are going to be creating a professional podcast for your business, it is worth spending a little bit of money on some equipment, though, to make it sound as good as it can. But essentially, you need an idea, and you need a voice. You need to be able to put your voice out there and speak with conviction about your topic. One of the freebies that I'm going to tell you about later on is actually, it's called What You Need to Start Your Podcast. So you're going to get everything in that freebie as my gift to you guys. And it breaks down all the equipment that you might need and how you would go about putting together an episode for your podcast as well. So what comes first, what comes next, and the correct order to do things in as well. So you're going to find out all of that inside that freebie as well.
Oh, so nice. Thank you so much. Such a wonderful, wonderful gift.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. But just to, how long does it take until someone could really start airing or putting out the podcast? So that we have an idea, especially if someone is working full time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there are a few ways you can go about it. So if someone is working full time and they only have a limited amount of time, you could probably get your podcast started in about 6 weeks.
Excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. So I run a program that helps people to start a podcast within 6 weeks as well. Mm-hmm. So when I said to you before, yes, you could start a podcast tomorrow, you could. In theory, you could start one, but it won't be your best work. Mm-hmm. And I always like to make sure with the clients that I have worked with me that, you know, we're setting you up for success. We're setting you up to show your business off in its best light. And the content that you produce for the podcast are related to the pain points of your ideal clients. Mm-hmm. And that's a key tip there. When you are creating your podcast, rather than just talking about what you want to talk about, because, you know, we're all passionate about subjects. Yes. We're all passionate about things, but it doesn't mean that they are the topics that our ideal listeners and clients want to hear. So it's about really brainstorming and thinking, what are the things that keep my ideal client up at night? Mm-hmm. And have, you know, do a whole brain dump, a huge page of all the things that your clients worry about, and produce content about each of those pain points. And what I recommend to my clients is that when they start the podcast, they launch with about 3 or 4 episodes ready to go. Mm-hmm. That speak specifically to those pain points, so that when somebody finds your podcast, they know straight away, I'm in the right place. This girl knows what I'm talking about. This girl knows what's in my head. That's what they need to hear from you. So if you have a coaching business and you help people to do social media, for example, you know, you're going to be talking about the key things coming up in social media, you know, how to produce amazing Facebook ads, for example. Mm-hmm. Things that keep them up at night and produce content specific for that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, very much so.
Yeah.
But when you start out, you need to have, as you said, an audience of perfect clients. So you need to have a bit of clarity, what they, as you said, now really, really nicely explained, how to really think in terms of who your perfect client is. But how to get the audience?
Yeah.
How to get the audience? How do you get someone who would listen? I mean, sometimes they just go, I know, online and search and accidentally run into your page, but how to get them?
There are loads of ways, and it's such a great question because it's one I get asked a lot. I get asked about, you know, how do I get people to listen to it? And should I start a podcast if I don't have an audience already? Mm-hmm. And my answer to that is definitely start a podcast if you have no audience. The reason for that is the reach on podcasting is incredible right now. You've probably, you know, in the last 18 months, you've seen podcasts get really popular, and they're not slowing down. They're really increasing in popularity. So what I would say to people who are starting out is start a podcast to help you grow your audience. Because there are multiple ways you can do that within your podcast. You can grow an audience with your podcast. And I've definitely done that. And I help my clients to do that. But in terms of the promotion of your podcast, the reach on podcast posts are incredible. So when you post your podcast on a social media platform, if you put it on Twitter or Instagram, Facebook, wherever you want, the reach on those podcast posts are much higher. Now, I've done a few experiments on my own podcast that, you know, when I specifically just write about my podcast, that gets lower engagement than when I put a post with a link to my podcast.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps there's a really cool piece of software called wave.co, WAVVE.co. And it's a way of embedding a little piece of your audio onto a social media post. You've probably all seen them on Instagram when you're scrolling through your feed.
Yeah.
A bit of audio. They get phenomenal reach. And we're in a pay-to-play environment online right now where we're constantly having to pay for adverts to get in front of the people that we really want to get in front of. You don't have to do that with podcasting. You know, it's a real alternative to spending hundreds and thousands of pounds, realistically, hundreds and thousands of pounds on Facebook and Instagram advertising, because podcasts get the reach. They are really hot right now. People are promoting them. And what happens is a really very quick way to get your podcast listened to is by having the people who are on your podcast share the podcast. So when I have people to come on my podcast as a guest, they then agree to share that with all of their social media, all of their email list, everybody. And that's a really great way to start getting listenership. So if you want to start a podcast that's an interview-based podcast, you're going to get downloads very quickly because people will share it. We talk about it in much more depth in my program, but you know, it's things like having a launch team ready, helping you to get into what's called new and noteworthy in iTunes, because as soon as you get on those first 2-3 pages on iTunes, your downloads skyrocket. So, and it's free. It's free.
But this is but brilliant. This is brilliant because I was talking to a passive income coach, and she said, if you want to get these things in front of your audience, you need to literally spend, she's from England, and she said, I think around 700 or 800 pounds, because otherwise just this Facebook ads don't work. But this is free. This is a revolution.
It's free. It is. And that's what, you know, I am on a personal mission to get more women into podcasting, because I think it's an excellent way. It works around your family. You can do it whenever you want to. It's all editable. So if your baby starts screaming in the background and you need to pause recording, that's fine, because it's all editable. It's not a live video. It's great for introverts as well. So if you don't like being live on video, then podcasting is an amazing way to get your message out there without having to look incredibly polished and have an amazing background, all of that stuff that we all worry about when we're doing things like Facebook Lives and so on. You don't need any of that. It is, you're right, it is a revolution. It's like Netflix for your ears. That's how I like to call it.
It is. And the way you explain this with such passion, I think that a lot of people will reach out to you just because of that, because of your energy, because you can really feel how
I'm glad. I am really passionate about them. I just think they're amazing because, you know, there is a podcast about anything you can possibly imagine. They're not just about business. You know, if you have the most obscure hobby that you don't think anybody else does, there will be a podcast about it. I guarantee you. There are over 550,000 active podcasts today. Amazing. And it's growing all the time. So yeah, it's an incredible way to get know, like, and trust with your audience. And it's quite an intimate way to connect with your audience because you're literally in their ears for half an hour or so every week. And when I said about not LinkedIn, about Netflix just now, it's so true, because when somebody finds your show, they binge listen.
Yeah,
they listen to 1 or 2 episodes, and then they get to know very quickly whether you're the right person for them to work with.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm glad you've seen I'm passionate about it.
Yeah, you are. But I know that some people out there, and I'm like that myself, I'm not very tech savvy. Do you need to be a tech savvy person?
Yeah, and this is the thing. This is a thing that puts a lot of people off.
Yeah.
Now, when I started my podcast, I was incredibly naive. I just thought, right, I'm going to start a podcast. And I didn't know what I didn't know. So I've done the work. I've been in the trenches and I've figured it all out. So I can help you with the tech. But essentially, to edit your podcast is free. You don't need fancy editing software. If you have a Mac, you can use a piece of software called GarageBand, which we've all heard of.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a Windows PC or laptop, you can use something called Audacity. And they're both free. So yes, it just takes a bit of practice, that's all, like anything. But it's free. So you don't have to spend hundreds of pounds on software to get started.
You really inspired me now. So because I wanted to start a podcast, I was thinking about it, but then, all these things, like, I don't know about this technical stuff. And, I love video. I like to be in video. I love doing summits. But also, I was just thinking, sometimes I'm just having a moment. I would like to record something, in my pajamas. Get it out there. And that would be a wonderful way. A podcast would be a wonderful way. But just before we conclude, how would you, if people are having the imposter syndrome, how to get over it? What's the correct way of saying how to get over it? So how to beat the imposter syndrome?
How to get rid of the imposter syndrome?
Get rid of it, yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think for me, the way to get over and get through the imposter syndrome is building evidence. Mm-hmm. So if you're telling yourself all the time, I'm not good enough for this, or I'm not pretty enough for this, or I'm not young enough for this, or whatever it might be that you're telling yourself, find evidence in your life that is the opposite of what you think. So if you're thinking to yourself, I'm really not tech savvy, I don't know what I'm doing with technology, I want you to get a pen and paper and write down as many things that you can where you have done well with technology. Even if it's as simple as, I set up a Facebook page, I was able to come on to Zoom and record you. All of those things we didn't know before we started using them, but we figured them out. So it's about having a list of evidence, the opposite of what you're thinking about. And keep that list of evidence front and center so that when you get those negative thoughts coming in your head, you can remember and read that list of things where you've done well. And that's what I do. We all have those negative voices occasionally, but you just learn ways to get over them. But it's about recognizing that you're saying those things to yourself, and asking yourself, would I say this to my best friend? Would I say this to my mother? Would I say this to my sister? And you'd be so surprised at how negatively you talk to yourself, the person who you're meant to love the most, but you would never dream of saying those things to somebody else that you love. So think about how that would sound if you said those words to another person as well.
Oh, this is so good. This is such a powerful message. It really is. So now, just before we go, you started talking about your freebie.
Yeah.
Now you can tell and share with us a bit more in detail. What have you prepared for us?
Of course, yeah. So I'm excited to share this with you because, as I said before, I get lots of questions about podcasting. So I wanted to pull something together for you that was really useful and tangible and you could go away and action. So everybody who downloads this freebie, it's called What You Need to Start Your Podcast. Really simple, but it talks about the equipment that you need. It talks about equipment on a budget, and it talks about equipment if you want to spend a little bit more money as well. It talks about, how to figure out who your ideal listeners are. It talks about how to figure out what the name of your podcast might be. It's about how to figure out the content that you want to produce inside your podcast as well. So it's got lots of things to think about inside the document. So you'll have the link, which you can share with everybody. If you download that, I'd love to help you. There's a link to my Facebook group as well called Courageous Podcasters, and we can help you some more in there as well.
Amazing. Lynsay, thank you so much for all this precious information, your positive energy and inspiration.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. I love talking about it. I could talk about it all day.
Yeah, it was just, I don't know, I loved it. I loved it. And I know our audience will love it too.
Thank you.
So thank you so much again. And for you, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for following us. And we see you again on another interview. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.